So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming on this Sunday. Is there anybody that this is the first time they've been here or are here? So let me just say that we have different programs during the week. Sunday, we usually have this 45 minutes of meditation, and then we have what is called the Dharma talk. It's usually in relationship to some teaching of Buddhism, but always in with the intention of how it can be applied in real life, daily life. And then on other days, like Wednesday night, we have a different kind of meditation, more guided meditation. And on Thursday night, we just have what's called extended meditation, 2 hours of just pure sitting and walking. So we have different, and lots of other things. But so this is what's happening today. And I believe today we have a children's program, family program today. So they'll be coming in about an hour. I was, and still hopefully will be talking from what we've been working with for the last 6-8 weeks or so, which are these wonderful mind trainings that come from the Indian Buddhist tradition via Tibet, and now very common, at least in Buddhist circles here in the West. They're called the Lojong teachings, these wonderful pith teachings and slogans that really are very practical and poetic. But really have the whole Buddhist teachings. And what I wanted to maybe begin this morning before we go to the slogans I was going to deal with is see their applicability to what is going on in the world. We even though we are sitting here today in great ease and comfort, we know that that is not the state of everyone in the world. And we know in the last 2 days, once again, sadly, once again, there is this shock about the violence that exists in our world. And reflecting on it, I couldn't help but think that we are so shocked by it because at least up to now, it does not happen that often in the West and in our own country. But there are other parts of the world where it is a daily occurrence, where every day we might hear the news and see another car bomb went off here, another, and 20 killed, 50 killed, children, same, and we don't think, oh my God. For many parts of the world, this is a daily occurrence. That people say goodbye, they're going out to a restaurant, they're going to a concert, they're going shopping, and such things happen. So it is a sad world. And it is important in the same way when there is suffering in our own life, when there is suffering and pain in our own relationships, that rather than a knee-jerk response, as we have often done, an emotional response, that we learn, and I think again this is what a spiritual path is about, it asks us to look more deeply into causes and conditions. For example, the causes and conditions in our own life that support suffering, and the causes and conditions in those around us that support their suffering. And it's out of that suffering that unskillful negative actions arise. And so even though on the scale of the world, these things are much larger, the explosions are much more intense, and the damage that is creating is much more widespread than what individuals do in their life, but we know it is the same. And we have to understand that the world is made up of individuals, and that all these individuals are acting from thoughts and feelings within their own mind, as well as the habit energy Same way we have habit energy, the nations of the world, the peoples of the world, the groups of the world have their own collective karma that is acted out. And we have to be very careful in the same way as individuals when we are faced with situations that we may not want to be happening, unpleasant situations, or we're not being treated the way we want, or even more when we are being treated in perhaps an aggressive way or an angry way, when that is coming toward us, to react in kind. As many people, or some people in here probably have learned, to react in kind only creates more damage, doesn't it? We know that, right? That is why, when people enter the criminal justice system with anger and aggression problems, they're sent to anger management school, right? It's like, all right, you need anger management. Or they're sent to some kind of intervention which says you need to look deeply at what's driving you. Right? And in the world, we have to do the same. Again, when these tragedies occur, and again, they're unusual tragedies for us in the West. In other parts of the world, they're daily tragedies. The knee-jerk reaction is what? Revenge. You hurt me, I'll hurt you. Right? The biblical injunction, right? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I mean, that's from 5,000 years ago. Right? And yet it still seems to be, for many people in the world, the operating principle. But I believe it was Gandhi who said it best, where he said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth makes the whole world blind. Makes the whole world toothless. There has to be another way. Right? And violence only begets more violence. Right? Aggression only begets more aggression. And we are in a cycle. We know that. The world is in a cycle. And our country is part of that cycle. And we have to, at some point, stop long enough to ask some deep questions. Is there another way to deal with this? Other than just feeding the flames of hatred and aggression and intolerance that is running rampant in the world. And again, this is nothing new. Unfortunately, it has its own historical development, at this time in our lives. But war and aggression and violence and anger and intolerance are as old as human beings, aren't they? That is why spiritual teachers appear in the world and say things like, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Am I my brother's keeper? It's not just Buddhism that has looked at these issues of the way human beings treat each other and tried to ask questions to show us there has to be another way. Right? So again, we are dealing with these slogans, and I thought this morning we can look at some of the ones I know. So how many of you have kind of been here over the weeks and are somewhat familiar with these mind trainings? How many aren't? Oh, we've got an equal group here. Okay. So these mind trainings are quite wonderful. There are 57 of them, and they really encapsulate the whole Buddhist teachings in a very simple and direct way. But I wanted to work on what's called the third section. These slogans and the way they're presented are much loved in the Buddhist tradition because of their emphasis on how to transform suffering, and even more so, how to deal with adversity. Right? And we could certainly say these things that are happening are adversive situations. And so the third section is entitled, The Transformation of Adverse Conditions into the Path of Awakening. And the first verse says, when evil fills the world and its inhabitants, change adverse conditions into the path of awakening. Right? I mean, this is a century. When evil fills the world and its inhabitants, change adverse conditions into the path of awakening. As opposed to what? As opposed to what most of us do, when evil fills the world and its inhabitants, change adverse conditions into more adverse conditions. That seems to be kind of the way, left to our own devices, we do it, don't? Isn't that right? Even though we do want, in our own personal lives, in our own relationships, something different, don't we? In the same way we want it for the world. In this other book this is a book from the 70s from a Tibetan teacher, he comments on this verse, and he says, in this age of degeneration, both the environment and its inhabitants, or the container and its contents, are filled with the effects of unskillful actions committed in the past. Both natural turmoils and ignorance, the cause of suffering, are now flourishing. Famine, drought, floods, ecological calamities abound in every corner of this world, and the beings living here are afflicted with numerous problems and dangers stemming from greed, hatred, and aggression. These problems are conducive to all types of sickness, mental anguish, conflicts, and so forth. Yet all such unfortunate occurrences result from deep reasons and causes. And we are directly receiving the fruition of unwholesome deeds that we meaning the collective we, as beings in this life, in this world, have collectively committed. The result is that we are born into the specific era and conditions of life, and we are all suffering together. Right? Both the perpetrators and the victims are all suffering together. Right? We have to take that bigger picture. So, what do you do when all adversity fills the world? How do we respond to this adversity and change it into the path of awakening? The first verse that follows this one is, drive all blame into one. Right? Remember, and I actually talked on that one. Right? Which means, what is the, rather than what we always do, and this is very personal. This is what we do as individuals, this is what we do as collectives, and this is what we do as countries, right? Something happens, something aversive happens, and the first thing we want to do is what? Blame someone. Right? And when we blame that someone, the only thing we want to do is what? Retaliate. Or, retaliate. Let them know what they've done and hold them responsible for it. Now again, this doesn't mean there isn't personal responsibility. I'm not saying that. But it means after a while, when you see a pattern, you have to go deeper. What is causing this? Right? What is the cause of myself or another person acting in the way they are? What really is to blame here? What is to blame here? What is the one thing to blame? In Buddhism, it is said, self. The The self that stands outside of life, outside of others, does not see its connection or its interconnection with other people, with the world, with the planet, and only thinks about what? Itself, myself, my needs, my wants, my rightness, my ideas, my religion, right? My, me. And that infects not only us as individuals, and the more egocentric we are, and the more we are willing to inflict our own views and our own ideas on others, and be intolerant and judgmental and even aggressive, the more suffering we create, not only for others, but for ourselves. The world is inflamed by selfishness, by self-centeredness. It is a disease of individuals and is a disease of collective groups. How else could you kill another human being? Right? How else could you justify what you do unless you are only thinking about what? Myself and my suffering. You see, you've made me suffer, I'm going to make you suffer. You've hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And there's no end to that, is there? That is why, from ancient times, in terms of religious teachers up until now, we have people giving another message. We have to look deeply into the sources, the cause of what's going on in the world. Is that clear? If we wanted to change. If we wanted to change, whether we want to make changes within ourselves, in our relationships with people, or whether we want countries to change their relationships with each other. It is no different. Don't let politicians and diplomats convince us that somehow there's some higher wisdom that they have, leave it to them, right? Well, we have left it to them. And we can see what we're getting for that, right? And that's the truth, isn't it? We see that. It is not as complicated as some make it out to be. It's actually quite simple. The basic fundamental principles of personal transformation are no different than the transformation of the world. And the same qualities that we need to cultivate and develop within ourselves for our own personal transformation, they need to be developed around the world. And doing everything we can to cultivate and support that will do more for changing situations than just throwing more fuel on the fire of hatred and aggression. What do we think fuels what we see in the world? Hatred and aggression. And the more we do it to them in retaliation, the more they feel justified in what? In doing it back to us. And there's no end to that. Right? There's no end to that. And we all know that personally, don't we? There's probably nobody here who's not had an aversive relationship with somebody that kind of tit for tat, and at some point, what? At some point, what, if we want it to stop? Somebody's got to say what? What? Enough. Let us stop and come back and find another way to resolve this. We know, this is so basic. We know, each of us knows, and professionals know, right? That when the mind is clouded by emotionality, when the mind is clouded by emotional afflictions, when the mind is clouded by anger, by fear, by hurt and disappointment. In Buddhism, those are called kleshas. Kleshas mean like coverings, they're clouds, and they cloud our capacity to see clearly. And if anything this world needs is what? Clarity, clear seeing. What's going on here? What's the problem? What options are there? But we know as long as the individual mind and the collective mind is clouded by emotionality, and the response of the leaders is just to feed that emotionality, nothing good can come out of that, can it? In the same way we know in our relationships with each other, nothing good comes out of that, right? Everybody knows that. And that's that's where it is. When adversity fills the world, turn it into the path of awakening. I mean, that's very profound. And it shows us, both personally in our own life and collectively in the life of the world, that when adversity arises, this is an opportunity for transformation, right? The adversity of what's going on in terms of global warming and the whole ecological disaster that is unfolding is an opportunity, isn't it? To change our relationship to the earth, to change our relationship to each other, to change our relationship to our children and our grandchildren and the future of this planet. This is an opportunity for transformation, isn't it? If we see it as that. If we see it as that. In the same way, this spiraling spiral of violence and aggression that has no end is an opportunity for transformation, for doing something different. It calls for us to do something different, just in a very practical way. So when adversity arises, when evil fills the world, as it says, we need to take this as an opportunity. Drive all blames into one. What is the cause of this? Right. The next verse is very interesting, and again, I won't go into it too much because I talked about it several weeks ago, but in the context of this, it says, be grateful to everything and everyone. Now you go, be grateful to what just happened in Paris. It doesn't mean like that was good, or we should be grateful in any way for the suffering of beings. But it, come on, again, it does give us an opportunity to turn things around. So anyhow, I just wanted to show, and I could say more, we should not become the mirror image of those who we see as our opposites. That is the great sadness of this world. We mirror the worst in our opposites. They bring us down to the very base response rather than, setting a higher bar for ourselves. It's funny, after 9/11, both Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama, some of the leading, if not the leading Buddhists in this world, and both, again, come from countries, they're only in the West for one reason, because of violence. They both come from countries where there was war, destruction. The Dalai Lama, his whole country was, destroyed. His religion was destroyed, and his country was taken over by a foreign power. Thich Nhat Hanh, his country was destroyed by civil war. I mean, at least the things that he believed in. Both of these two gentlemen know violence and intolerance and hatred firsthand. Is that clear? They're not in some ivory tower. They're not in some alternative, peaceful universe putting out beautiful spiritual statements. These are people deeply involved, they and their followers, deeply involved in the suffering of the world and have been recipients of great aggression and hatred. Is that clear? Please understand that. And both of them said, please, don't respond in kind. Please, look deeply. Try to understand. And that's why the adversity is so hard, because when something is happening that we don't want to happen, when somebody we perceive is treating us unfairly, unjustly, right? The last thing we want to do is what? Is be understanding. Isn't that true? That's the last thing we want to do. When we do it, we have to almost like force her. Can I get in a few shots first, and then I'll back off and make nice. You know what I mean? It's like, right? It is so hard, and you can see it's so hard for us as individuals to step back and step out of the drama and to see what's really going on. Not only my suffering, but their suffering, right? And we know that the basis of any kind of compassionate act that relieves suffering must include as its basis a willingness to see the situation from the side of the other person, right? And that's called empathy. That's called understanding, isn't it? And it's, how can any situation, even interpersonal, between a parent and child, or between two adults, or at work, if we're not willing, unless we want to duke it out, right? Or passively put up with it, or passively aggressively put up with it, is a willingness to ask the question, what are the causes and conditions that are causing them to do what they do and say what they say? Right? I mean, in the world of international relations, what I'm saying might be considered what? Blasphemy these days. We have come so far away from reason in international relations. Right? Maybe a little more air conditioning. I see Ketty is fanning herself. Maybe that's a nonverbal sign that that's better. You'll probably get it around 76 for all these people. Well, let me say, any questions? Or anybody see it differently? I mean, please don't, this is not truth in any way. Yes? Well, again, in Buddhism, compassion does not really mean, it is much more than empathy and love, okay? Compassion means the skillful relief of suffering. In Buddhism, the word karuna means that. It is not, there's a different word for loving kindness. Metta. It's a different word. But the word karuna, compassion, implies quite directly it is an active engagement in the world of suffering and a skillfulness to remove the cause of suffering. Okay. And so we need to stop and begin to understand what is causing these people to act the way they do. Right? And to throw slogans, they're all barbarians, they're all this, does not help, does it? does not help. Even when we see human beings, every human being is the son and daughter of someone. Every human being, if they have children, right, love their children and want to keep them safe. Right? That is so basic to what it means to be a human being. Right? And if we don't ask ourselves when we see people, doing so different than that, what is the cause of that? At least to ask that question. It was interesting. The Dalai Lama and both Thich Nhat Hanh after 9/11 said, something quite incredible. They said, we should find who these people are and dialogue with them to find out why what is their suffering. A lot of times we know, just in personal relationships, a lot of people act out because they don't feel the other person hears them. Or the other person, is not interested in their suffering. Right? That's very common, isn't it? We never ask that question. When, we see somebody's anger, we see somebody's passive-aggressive behavior, we see this, but we never go, are you suffering? Tell me about your suffering.
What they're doing is because they're suffering?
Happy people don't do this, do they? They're suffering. Right? We know they're suffering greatly, and this doesn't justify it, do you understand? This doesn't justify it. But, the tools of Buddhism, the tools of a nonviolent world are understanding and compassion. And they have the capacity, both in individual and in collective relationships, to cause transformation. Violence, aggression, intolerance, not, I used to be a family therapist, and you get the families in there where everybody's like this. I'm not talking to her. Not after what she did to me. And he's saying the same thing. His arms across too, It's like, then you get family therapy where, the kids are doing the same thing. How's anything going to change? Right? And we know the first thing in a situation that we try to get people to be, to relax, be comfortable, and to talk about their suffering. And people, many people in this world have this thing as well. Somehow, if, to listen to somebody's suffering, to listen to how somebody sees things, is not that we were afraid, oh my God, if I do that, then I'm going to sort of be saying they're right, and there's one thing we hate is what? Yeah. But again, it's not doing that. It could be what they're saying is totally off base, is totally distorted, right? But at least we understand why they do what they do. See, as long as we could say, I can't understand why they do what they do, there's no end to it. It's when we finally go, when I'm willing to enter into even into the mind and the eyes of my enemy and see what the world looks like to them, I now have the capacity of perhaps changing that situation and changing that enemy into a friend, right? When I understand them. But somehow we have this thing, like somehow to do that is somehow what? Weak. Yeah, well said. Weak. Yeah, I'm giving in. It's like, it's crazy. Right? That's the stuff that teenagers do. Right? Do you remember being a teenager? Or you remember being a parent of teenagers? That's what they do. Right? I'm not speaking. There's no resolution in that. There's no reconciliation in that. Both for the individual and the collective. Yeah. We used to do that. Do you remember? We used to, there used to be something in conflicts. You know what they were called? They were called truces. I mean, it's been a long time because now it's the endless war. But there used to be wars, and then after people got tired enough of killing each other, one side or the other would say, let's have a truce, right? And then they would have talks, remember? And then there'd be, things would get resolved. I mean, that's not that long ago. Actually, diplomacy was like that. Remember? I mean, for those who are young, you probably don't remember that. You think just it goes on and on. But there used to be attempts at stopping these things. And it always meant you have to sit down with that person that you believe has wronged you. Right? And that goes on in the world. I mean, do you remember after in South Africa? You remember South Africa? After years and years of apartheid? Years and years of violence, terrorism against, by the white population, minority white against the black population, right? And when that finally ended, what did they do? They had this wonderful process of reconciliation, right? Where people who were enemies, and actually perpetrators who had done violence to very specific people, were brought together to talk, right? And that process of reconciliation and what went on is a model that shows it can be done, right? I mean, for those of you, I don't know how old we all are, but do you remember World War II? Right? We had enemies, violent enemies, that we were trying to kill and they were trying to kill us. Do you remember anybody old enough to remember who they were?
Germany and Japan.
Germany and Japan, who are now what? Our closest allies. Well, that's interesting. Right? How did that happen? It didn't happen because of war. It happened because what happened after war, didn't it? That there was reconciliation. There was communication. Right? Yes.
What would you give a person who tends to blame themselves and they punish themselves?
Yeah. Again, the slogan is drive all blames into one. Okay? And that's not, what that means is not the personality. It means, as I think again Gandhi said, hate the sin, not the sinner. Right? So if somebody, again, I don't think anybody, maybe that's not true. I mean, there are some people who are very, very disturbed. But I think most people don't want to suffer. Right? Most people don't want to have 1,000,001 character defects, do they? No. I think most people at the end of the day would like to be decent people and like to be perceived as a decent human being, right? And yet, there are things within us, causes and conditions, from life, from childhood, from growing up, that cause us often to act and react in ways that when we're more rational, that we, would rather not. Now, to blame yourself for these causes and conditions is not what this slogan's about. When it says drive all blames into one, it really says, what is the ultimate cause of these defects? It's a belief in a separate self and the narrative of that self that is the source of this. Not you or not that person. Is that clear? And so you don't find in Buddhism, people who grow up in Buddhist colleges, a lot of that kind of self-hate, self-blame, which is so epidemic in our society. That's because we have a society in which ego and selfhood is enshrined. Which means what? That when we're successful, we think we're the greatest in the world, right? And when we're not successful, we think we're the worst in the world, right? But that's very much part of our Western psychology because we don't see this interconnection and we don't see really what the causes are. I mean, to me, to hate oneself, as some people do, to have this deep sense of shame or unworthiness that so many people carry, is a tragedy. Right? Because again, it's not me. It's not you. Right? It's just the causes and conditions and the seeds that were watered in our growing up. Right? And depending on the causes and conditions, the family we were brought up in, what happened, not in the family, but in life, in school, in relationships, and unfolding, life happens. And depending on the way it unfolds for each of us, the conditions in which we grow and develop, the seeds, the good and the bad, the positive and negative seeds that are within our consciousness are getting watered and have gotten watered. Okay? It's as simple as that. If there was a lot of negativity, a lot of trauma, a lot of difficulty, a lot of bad modeling, etc., we would say, oh, wow, a lot of those negative seeds got watered, right? And you might look back and go, yeah, I mean, understanding, compassion, patience, loving kindness, caring, there wasn't a lot of watering of those seeds. Well, no wonder. You see, no wonder these have grown so strong and these are sort of weak. Is that clear? It's as simple as that. And once you understand that, you realize, oh, it's just a matter of watering the seeds. That's what practice is about, right? Learning that we all have these seeds within us, and that as opposed to letting life control what seeds get watered, remember, that's called what? Childhood. In childhood, we are dependent creatures. We're dependent on our families. We're dependent on our teachers when we're little. So we are more the recipient of other people's waterings. Is that clear? And that's because we're children. I mean, we're dependent. We're in a certain sense, we're innocent. And we're not empowered as a human being, are we? We're not very conscious. We're children. And so up to a certain point in life, much of who and what we are is simply the product of our conditioning. It's really, isn't that the truth? I mean, does anybody see it differently? You see, it's as simple as that. Now, why should we be grateful for spiritual paths, Buddhism, Dharma, these kinds of things? Because they tell us, they explain that to us, right? And they say, what is your name? Celeste. It says, like they would say to Celeste, yeah, I understand the causes and conditions that got you to this point. But you can become conscious. You can become self-aware, and you can begin to choose what seeds going forward you want to condition, you want to water, as well as understanding that all those things that are rising in you that you don't like are not you. They're the seeds in you that were watered by others. And you didn't understand that. So after a while, you just continued on. Oh, I'll just continue watering these negative seeds myself. It's like we don't know better. Did you see? We just don't know better. It's not like we're bad people. We just don't know better. We think these are the seeds in my garden, right? These are the plants that I'm growing. Until somebody comes along and says, Celeste, you don't have to keep growing them, right? And Celeste might go, wow, no one ever told me that. I thought I had to keep working with this garden just with all the plants I was given. You see how revolutionary, in a certain sense, that is. But again, it's not going to happen in a day. That's why we call it practice. And the practice is, on the one hand, learning that we can cultivate a whole new repertoire of seeds that we want to grow, as well as we can be skillful in the way we handle the arising of all these past seeds, which you'll notice, and I'm sure everybody in here has noticed, that even though we have the best of intentions every day to do things differently, you may notice it always doesn't go that way, does it? Why not? Because the seeds that we have cultivated in the past continue to arise, right? Now, when you know that, and when they arise, rather than feeding them, as we have done unmindfully in the past, which only keeps them strong, we now have a very different way of relating to them. Oh, that's just my conditioning. That's just thoughts. That's just seeds from the past. I can see that and just let it go. And focus on cultivating these other seeds that I want to grow. And it's a process. So what this is called is, on the one hand, in the world of karma, or cause and effect, I have all my karma from the past that still arises, right? They arise as thoughts, they arise as reactivity and all that. How do I deal with that skillfully? And at the same time, how do I, understanding in the world of cause and effect that what I'm doing right now will make effects for my future, how do I really be very clear that, from this moment on, I'm not going to make negative causes anymore. I'm done with that, right? I want to make sure that my future as it unfolds is a happier future. Is that clear? And so that's a process. It doesn't just happen, but it happens with that understanding and a commitment. And that's why it's very important that we not just stumble into our days. Many people stumble into their days. The alarm goes off, and, I'm going to stumble into their day, right? Blindly find, go to the coffee machine. You know what I mean? I'm going to turn on the. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, and then they just what? Walk out the door, and they wonder why it's same old, same old. We have to get up consciously. It's a brand new day, 24 hours. I vow to live it in mindfulness. Right? We understand that this is an opportunity today to be different. But if we're not self-aware, it's not going to be any different, is it? How can it be? Is that clear? So we have to begin in the morning. That's why it's important to have a spiritual practice, a meditative practice that we do in the morning. Not because we're good Buddhists or good meditators, but because we want to change. And unless we take that time, right, before our day begins to kind of get clear about, how I want to be today, right? And to create some kind of calmness or clarity before we head out that door, it's just going to be same old, same old. And that's just the way it is. So it's very important that we be conscious people. And if we want to affect change and transformation in our lives, we have to begin, every day. Can't just do it today and think that somehow this week's going to be different. This will not do it for you. Coming to meditation once a week will not do it for you. Hopefully, coming to meditation, meditating together, hearing Dharma talks, this is watering those positive seeds of transformation. Okay? But if each of us, when we leave here, don't want to make a commitment to ourselves and our loved ones to do life differently, it won't happen. There's no magic in this. That was always the thing I loved about Buddhism when I first got into it 40 or 50 years ago, was it wasn't mystical. It wasn't metaphysical. It wasn't esoteric. It was like cause and effect. Wow, I can get that. Even though I was in my early 20s, I got that. I could figure, that makes sense. Well, that's simple. Well,
I'm kind of confused whether there's does it make sense? Is there any action implication, for example, in a situation like this out in the world, or is it primarily that we do our own healing and transformation of our own situation?
And what about out in the world?
Here's this tragedy in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
So
again, so did everybody hear the question? The question is, so are we talking just about an internal transformative process, or how about this broken world? Again, we have to stop acting in the world unskillfully. But that doesn't mean we completely stop until we're fully enlightened Buddhas before we act. But we should make sure that all our actions in the world and in relationships is coming from this more enlightened place. If that means, if I look at myself and go, wow, I'm really a mess, right? And everything I do is just driven by anger and egoism, and every person I run into, it's just about me, right? Wow, when we see that, I'd say, maybe take a little hiatus, right? Until you get your act a little together, so you don't go out in the world and perpetuate more suffering. But again, we don't have to wait to full enlightenment to begin the process of healing the world. But I certainly believe that individual healing does contribute to the healing of the world. As Thich Nhat Hanh says, peace begins, a peaceful world is created by peaceful people. So I think if we want a better world, and we want a world free of aggression and violence, I think the first thing we should do is make sure that all the seeds of anger and violence and aggression have been uprooted in me. I mean, that's a good start, right? But I'm not a fully enlightened Buddha, and yet I'm talking this way, hoping that people will, bring more light into the world, more clarity into the world, more compassion into the world,
You talk about dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
How can we dialogue with inadequate people? Because that is what we are facing here.
Again, I would say, if you were in that position, I would say to you, Sergio, please find a way to do that. And if you're absolutely convinced from trying that there is no way, then maybe we need to find another way. But for some reason, that has been forgotten. Right? That has been forgotten. I am unaware that anybody in our government is trying to dialogue with quote-unquote our enemies. As long as we give them violence, that only justifies what they believe in. I mean, it's sad. To call our enemies barbarians is to dehumanize them and to justify our not talking to them. And again, I only say that because we do the same thing in our little puny relationships, don't we? We demonize the other person. They are so what? I can't believe how selfish they are. I can't believe how insensitive they are, right? You see what I'm saying? We do that too, which then justifies what? Our own unwillingness to acknowledge what's going on and deal with it. We do that all the time. We turn the other into some kind of demon. And people do that even with people they love. Have you noticed that? Even with people we love, we demonize them. And then we undemonize them, right? Right? When they treat us nicely, we go, wow. Now I remember. Yeah. But then, it's like we're crazy that way. Again, the Japanese and the Germans are our allies. They used to be our worst enemy. We wanted to kill each other. We wanted to only drop bombs on each other, didn't we? Somebody's got to see the bigger picture here. Wait. No. Yes, Kitty. Yeah.
Just wanted to add,
agree to what's happening.
Yeah.
Really about all the other side of the world. As I was reading, this is just my reading, I don't know how I heard it.
Mm-hmm.
Just before the present act, I think friends of your arms and see you help me pursue the children. And the rest is out there to read,
Yeah.
as they are saying. So again, when you're talking about understanding, it's also understanding the grief, the pain, the grief, what it's caused. Those children have no nationality, they're just children. There's a beautiful picture of this
Yeah.
man over his child, a little girl. It's so overwhelming to
Right, and to yes.
when you were talking about ourselves, yes, we are, but I think the movement it's adds to this because when we're part of a group that thinks and feels the same, we don't see ourselves as selfish.
Mm-hmm.
But we are willing to die as suicide bombers for the benefit of all. They see themselves as martyrs. They're not being selfish in their life.
Yeah.
They're sacrificing even the most important thing which is our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So without that understanding, even in our grief, I think we're adding to the pain of the other side. Because it's now myself included with the friend flag on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And they grieve for that, but what about the grief of
Yeah.
their parents who are losing
Yeah.
children, their children when we found
Right, it's the same. We have to stop. But right, I mean, we have to be willing to ask that question, why do people do this? You know, why do people sacrifice their lives? You know, and we can say it's, we can say all kinds of things, but I think it's much more personal than that. You know, they want revenge too. Right? And it's this spiral of revenge and hurt that we impose on each other. You know, again, couples do it, families do it, and nations do it, religions do it. I mean, it's the sadness of the world. So good. But there is something at the same time good, such as children and love and kindness and all the good things. So it's important that we it's important that we not turn away from the suffering of the world, because it's certainly present, and we need to learn how to be present to it, but not allow it to overwhelm us, nor drive us into afflictive mind states, but really bring forth the best in us, right? And that's why I think it's important that we take time together to talk this way. There's not too many arenas where we can talk this way, is there? You know, and you turn on the news, nobody is talking this way, or even looking deeply into these issues, are they? So I think it's important what we did here this morning, in our own little way. Whether you agree with what I've said or disagree, I mean, to me that doesn't matter. What matters is that we talk openly and more deeply about the suffering of our world, because it is our world. It is our children's world. It is our grandchildren's world. So thank you for coming.